Question: why are my cucumbers suddenly tasting bitter? Answer: cucurbitacins. For a more detailed answer, keep watching. So in basic, the reason our cucumbers taste bitter is because of the presence of cucurbitacins. And so these cucurbitacins are a class of triterpenes, which are basically just plant secondary metabolites that the plant produces. And oftentimes many of these secondary metabolites are produced to decrease herbivory, right? To prevent certain animals or certain insects from consuming the foliage, or at least consuming excessive amounts of the foliage. So the cucurbitacins are basically a part of the plant's immune system. And these specific compounds are most notably in cucurbitaceous crops, right? So like cucumbers, squash, pumpkins, zucchini, those types of plants. But some of these cucurbitacins can also be found in other plant families as well. Sometimes people will talk about cucurbitacin as a specific singular compound, even though the cucurbitacins is really a class of compounds, right? And there are a bunch of different variations of these cucurbitacins, and in this case, each specific one is named by a specific letter of the alphabet, right? So we have like cucurbitacin A, cucurbitacin B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, O, P, Q, R, and S. There are different nuances, different attributes between these different cucurbitacins, right? Cucurbitacin B might prevent or decrease the presence of an insect on one of these plants, while cucurbitacin E or F might only act on a different insect. Or also when we get into some of the potentially like medicinal type attributes, these different cucurbitacins can have different roles, right? Different attributes, right? So there are some pros and cons to discuss about these cucurbitacins. In relatively small amounts, these cucurbitacins in the human diet can or potentially may be very, very beneficial, right? A lot of plant secondary metabolites, they help to keep the plant healthy and decrease herbivory. Maybe they can also be antimicrobial. And so a lot of those beneficial effects can be passed on to us when we consume those plants. So in moderate amounts, there are some research articles out there that point to the anti-inflammatory effects of the class of cucurbitacins, also anti-cancer, anti-tumor, and anti-arthrosclerotic. So basically anything that's anti-inflammatory is usually also going to be anti-cancer, right? Because cancer and inflammation can commonly go hand in hand. Of course, I'm not a doctor, I'm just sharing information. Anti-tumor also relates to anti-cancer. Also, if something is anti-inflammatory, it will also help boost cardiovascular health and function. And I'm also going to attach an article in the show notes. It points to a scientific article that discusses in depth a lot of these medicinal or pharmacological attributes, since I'm definitely not really qualified to talk about that, but this particular article really dives deep into the details and can give a little bit more of a comprehensive approach. And then also another benefit of these cucurbitacins is that they help to deter pests when they are produced in the plant, and also maybe some potential antimicrobial effects too, right? So this really helps to keep the cucumber plants or melon plants or squash plants healthy. So what are some of the potential risks of cucurbitacins in high enough doses? And of course this is dependent also on the individual. Sometimes certain people may be more sensitive or more intolerant of these or certain cucurbitacins than other people would be. And there is this thing known as toxic squash syndrome. That is when the human body becomes overloaded with cucurbitacins faster than it can either break it down or get rid of them, and then certain symptoms can become pretty manifest at that point. So this is just an example of where too much of a good thing can become a bad thing, right? And so we want to be kind of more like the ancient Greeks, right, in all things in moderation. Cucurbitacins are commonly produced in the parts of the plant of like a cucumber plant, for example, that we don't normally eat, like the leaves, the roots, the sprouts, right, as these plants are beginning to sprout and emerge from the soil, right, and that is generally pretty normal, right? It's there for plant defense as the plant is growing into maturity, or as it's sprouting up from the ground, and so this might help to deter herbivory or, you know, insect damage from certain insects. But the fruits are generally very low in cucurbitacins. A lot of breeding practices over the decades, over the generations, really has decreased the amount of cucurbitacins in a lot of these different cucurbit crops, right? Like the cucumbers, the melons, the squash. And especially in the case of cucumbers, if our cucumbers start tasting bitter, that means that something is wrong. The plant is probably experiencing some type of stress, or some genetic mutations may also increase the cucurbitacins in the fruit. So first and foremost, do your research into what cucumber varieties might be particularly low in cucurbitacins, especially if this is something that you are sensitive with. Beyond that, if we have a cucumber that is pretty low in cucurbitacins, but the fruit is suddenly and uncharacteristically high in cucurbitacins, that would probably point to an environmental factor. Any happening that would cause the plant stress, right? So we're talking about drought, excessive heat, poor nutrition in the soil, so like a lack of nutrients, in some cases a lack of sun, and so those types of stressors can and will commonly induce excessive amounts of cucurbitacins in the fruit. So what are the solutions? We did touch on the varieties. Most varieties of cucumbers are usually pretty low in cucurbitacins, but there are a few varieties that are extremely low, right? And then beyond that, we want to prevent or minimize the stressors in the first place. So like making sure these plants have access to an adequate amount of water, especially during times of drought, maybe helping to mulch the soil and build up the organic matter in the soil profile as well, and that can help to collect and hold and retain that moisture in the soil. Ensuring other plants around the cucumbers are not excessively shading out these cucumber plants can also be very beneficial in making sure that the plants get an adequate amount of sunlight that they need. Of course, if it's cloudy, and if it's cloudy for like a week and a half or 2 weeks and raining and whatnot, that we can't really control quite as much. So you might just have to wait it out in that case. And you can just pick off the cucumbers during that time, and then make sure that the cucumber plants get sunlight after that, and then the new batches of cucumbers that they produce may then be lower in the cucurbitacins, like back to normal. Also, like just building the soil health, like I mentioned, the organic matter, maybe certain nutrient amendments, right, if it proves to be necessary. And then I just want to like close off too of like, even if your cucumbers are high in cucurbitacins and they do taste bitter, there can be a way around it, where usually when we look at a cucumber towards the stem end, right, where that cucumber connects to the plant, is going to be where the cucurbitacins are most highly concentrated, right? And then as we go further out distally to the farthest end of the cucumber, it will become less concentrated. On top of that, the vast majority of these cucurbitacins are located immediately under the skin. So if your cucumbers are pretty bitter, you can cut off that front portion, that stem portion of the plant, and then you can also peel a lot of the skin off the cucumber to help reduce that bitterness. Alright, so thank you so much for checking out this video on cucumbers and cucurbitacins. Now we know why our cucumbers taste so bitter sometimes, right? And what might be going on to cause that bitterness, right? But we also know that sometimes in moderate amounts, cucurbitacins aren't necessarily bad at all. And in fact, they can potentially have beneficial effects on our health. We also know that cucurbitacins are there as one of their primary roles is to protect the plant, right, in which they are produced. And we also have some steps we can take to problem solve, right, or to prevent some of these issues of high cucurbitacins accumulating in the fruits. So thank you so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in a future video. Take care.